Hi, welcome to the bathtub. It's the old masturbator. Get grandma, get the kids. It's a family friendly, all family friendly episode of the bathtub. All our episodes are basically family friendly, unless I say something I shouldn't have said or use a word I shouldn't have used. But basically, we're family oriented, and again, it's unpixelated edition. This is a new. We're trending into the future. We're way ahead of everybody else in the YouTubing business. We have no tech at all. It's on a hand cranked butter churn. We're filming this on a hand cranked butter churn, that Aunt Sally's running for us. I can't even say Aunt Sally, and the parakeet is she's totally unpixelated. No, there's no tech in Dodo whatsoever, and she's just kind of hanging out. I've got my big hat here in case she causes trouble. This episode is brought to you by. We have a special product. We have a product placement thing. On the Planet of Bold Women by yours truly, Scott Bradfield. It's a fairly shortish novel. You can read it probably in 2 sittings, and it has absolutely no redeeming social value whatsoever. It's about a young man who's irresistible to women. Nothing to do with my life whatsoever, I can promise you. But it's based. Funny enough, it's based on places. The most personal book of mine in terms of just the places and the air and I wrote a lot about places I know well, like London and Daly City, and places I grew up and places I lived over the years, and central London and North London. So it's kind of the ambiance is all based on my life, and the people and characters have nothing to do with me. Anyway, today we're going to talk. We've got one of our chores here. Our chores. We don't call them chores. We call them bathing excursions. They're bathing excursions. This one we've been doing. We've been reading through Cormac McCarthy's work from beginning to end. What else? We're reading Brian Moore and William Trevor's novels backwards chronologically. And we have all these and we're reading all the Maygrays and so forth. Some of you have been following us, since the mid '50s. Know that some of these projects have gone on for a long time. But our new project, because I'm working on a piece about him, is Don DeLillo. We're reading through Don DeLillo's work up until Underworld, and the one I read this past couple of weeks, because I kind of fell behind doing these talks because I was busy trying to paginate this. Just paginating and doing the software is a huge pain in the butt when you self-publish your work, to the complete absence of applause. This is called Great Jones Street. It's Don DeLillo's second novel. I've read most of Don DeLillo's novels before, and I have kind of mixed opinions about him, which I'm probably going to kind of belabor a bit. So excuse me if you're a big Don DeLillo fan. I like Don DeLillo a lot. This came out in 1973. I would have read it back in the 90s, 80s. No, probably the 80s. I read a lot of DeLillo in the 80s and 90s particularly, and I enjoyed his work. This one I remember sort of liking and wasn't wild about it. This kind of mixed feeling I have about many Don DeLillo books. And most of my original feelings were kind of confirmed by reading it again 30, 40 years later. It's worth reading, like everything by Don DeLillo, but the gist, the nut of my presentation on DeLillo is as a reader, purely as a reader, not as a critic, is he's hilarious. He writes one funny sentence after another. It's impossible to open a page of a Don DeLillo book and not find something pretty funny or sort of illuminating, particularly about American post-war culture, this kind of mad postmodern whirl of imagery and advertising and bullshit, and yet his stories just don't seem to ever get going. His stories. I'll talk a little about that in this book as we go through them. So this is the second novel. It's about a guy called Bucky Wunderlich. It's very satiric, like most of his books, but extremely satiric, even more satiric than most of his books, because he's a kind of rock and roll superstar. He's been compared to Bob Dylan, and there is a Bob Dylan-ish quality to him because he's kind of an intellect, kind of a cranky intellectual, but kind of a sloppy intellectual too. He's not a trained reader or thinker, but he likes to act like a kind of spouter of kind of poetry and intelligence. And he does lots of crazy performances, and he kind of walks away from rock and roll and disappears. And it's kind of a bit based on, it sounds a little bit like Bob Dylan when he, after the famous motorcycle accident in the 60s, when he kind of disappeared for a couple of years and stopped performing, and he did what are now known as the basement tapes. And there's something called the mountain tapes that Bucky Wenderlich has put together in his, when he disappears, when he goes into his exile from popular culture. And he does something called the mountain tapes. The basement tapes were the Bob Dylan thing that he did with the band. And the attractive quality of Bob Dylan in doing the basement tapes, which many of us enjoy, I like Dylan and I like the basement tapes, is that he went off and just said, to hell with it, I'm just going to do music for myself and my friends. He didn't release the work, he didn't produce the work in a polished way. He just poured out all these crazy songs. They're really some of his weirdest songs, and they're still worth listening to. And they weren't released until much later. Anyway, that's kind of the premise of this. Is this guy named Bucky Wenderlich disappears, and he hides out somewhere in Manhattan on Great Jones Street. I think he owns the building. I can't remember now. And he hides in this place and doesn't go out. And he basically just sits around thinking. That's basically it's a first-person novel, which is sort of what DeLillo is best at, because his plots are so wonky and they're kind of flaccid. They just don't really ever get going. The plots, it's just basically this machine to have Bucky think about things. And he's just thinking, observing, and listening to people talk. And that stuff, some of that can be very, very fun. Again, it's hard not to open a page. I mean, I was just browsing through it. You see, these are pretty disorganized talks. But it's not like I'm not taking notes. I take all these notes and I don't ever mention any of them. I just kept tagging things I thought were kind of interesting. There's one line in here. He says, what's that line? If Pavlov had been born in America, was working in America today, he would never go broke. No, wait a sec. That's not what he says. What the hell is that Pavlov line? Anyway, you see how well we organize this whole thing. Anyway, if we'd been alive in Pavlov's day, here I found it, he could have saved a whole lot of money on dog food. It's much better than what I came up with, isn't it? If we'd been alive in Pavlov's day, he could have saved a whole lot of money on dog food. He could have just used human beings to prove his assertions that human character is nothing but response, stimulus and response. Okay, so there's lots of wonderful passages in this, lots of observations of modern culture, of American culture. Here's a typical paragraph from Don DeLillo. Almost every paragraph has this kind of lucidity and this kind of clarity and this intelligence. A telephone that's disconnected, deprived of its sources, becomes in time an intriguing piece of sculpture. The business normally transacted is more than numbed with the phone's limp ganglia. It is made eternally irrelevant. Beyond the reach of shrill necessities, the dead phone disinters another source of power, the fact that it will not speak. Although made to speak, made for no other reason, enables us to see it in a new way as an object rather than an instrument, an object possessing a kind of historical mystery. The phone has made a descent to total dumbness, and so becomes beautiful. There's a lot of this, kind of these objects in modern culture that just proliferate, like telephones. There's very interest in Warhol in a lot of Don DeLillo's work, and that notion of the repetition of these images, and the notion of the image cut off from its function makes it sort of beautiful. Anyway, there's lots of these lovely little ideas that float through it. There's some very funny passages in it. There's a crazy neighbor who's a writer, who's I think he writes kiddie porn. The neighbor writes kiddie porn. He says it's not really doing. I'm not doing that great with it, but I found a whole new venue for becoming a popular writer. And what else have we got? I can't remember, and I don't think that Bucky knows whether it's kiddie porn is about kids being pornographic or it's pornography about kids. Anyway, it's just one of the weird ideas. And so Bucky, one of the things that's weird about the book, and it kind of goes off in these kind of long tangents. There's, for example, a long section, it's almost 8 to 10 pages of the lyrics from the Mountain Tapes. and the lyrics, which are just very, even crazier and weirder than the Dylan's Basement tapes. They have things like VC Sweetheart, born in a hearse, left foot first, nursed on a hand-me-down nipple, got a murder degree from ITT, shot 3 holes in a cripple. They're these kind of crazy, slightly funny, surreal songs that kind of sometimes get tiresome. And it goes on quite a long way. And at the end, there's a couple of funny passages where he has like about almost 20 pages of quotes from these songs, or just almost the entire songs, often which go into gibberish, because there is a kind of Dadaesque element that runs through this too, that goes on like baba, 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 this and that, egramine and woe, sand words on mud, high taljonics, everything ever spoken shines from my teeth. Baba, baba, baba. So every once in a while, this kind of gibberish comes emerging out of the Wonderlick life and the Wonderful Lick world. It's connected to a drug. I forget the name of the drug. DeLillo loves to explore crazy ideas for drugs, which affects the brain and basically dismantles the language faculty in people. And this drug is being sold by a guy named Dr. Pepper. Dr. Pepper is a perfect name for a DeLillo character. And so Bucky is somehow, while he's hiding out, he basically just sits around observing, and then there's this notion of periphery of this kind of 60s radical group, kind of like the Weather Underground, only they're dealing with drugs and trying to dismantle society through drugs. And then a girlfriend comes and stays in the house with Bucky, and she just drops dead at one scene, just drops dead. There's that's about the closest to a plot. It's just sometimes something happens, and then you just go on to into more scenes. I find all of his books a little tiresome at a certain point, and that's why I kind of prefer the shorter ones. That's basically my whole argument about DeLillo is stick with the shorter novels, and this one is a little like Americana in the sense that you just really have one scene after another after another. It's almost just a journey through New York in the late 60s, early 70s. I think that's all I have to say about it. If I was going to suggest to read, again, there's a lot of stuff from Toeffler. If you remember Alvin Toeffler, the notion of, what was that book called? The stuff about sensory overload. I don't remember the name of the book at the moment. But Toeffler's arguments in something, I forget the title. Anyway, I think I took that drug that Dr. Pepper's given around, and I'm a little tired today, I guess, or a little out of it. But anyway, interesting book. I liked it. I don't enthusiastically run out and say you should read Don DeLillo. I like him a lot intermittently. I intermittently enjoy a Don DeLillo novel. That's my entire presentation. Take care. Future Shock by Alvin Toeffler. The drug is wearing off. I'll talk to you soon.